Hello, everyone. My name is Henry Chase Driver, and today we will be analyzing the case study titled, How Are U.S. Multinationals Preparing for Brexit? Brexit, short for British exit, is a term used to describe the withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the European Union. The central theme of this case is strategy and globalization. Specifically, how U.S. nationals had to respond to their primary European hub becoming politically and legally uncertain. This is not a single company case. This case examines how an entire class of multinational firms had to rethink their European strategy when the UK voted to leave the EU. The strongest course themes here are strategy and globalization. Before Brexit, US multinationals used the UK as their European base. It offered common language, strong institutions, and full EU single market access. Brexit, however, threatened that model by creating uncertainty across cross-border services, talent movement, and the legal environment. The case covers a broad group of U.S. multinationals, not just one company. Named firms include HSBC, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Morgan & Stanley, plus pharma and high-tech firms. Their shared competitive success depended on three things. First was the regulatory certainty through EU passporting. Second is access to international talent, as over 25% of pharma employees came from abroad. And thirdly, the ability to serve all EU markets from one UK base. Brexit threatened all three simultaneously. These three examples directly relate us to regional economic integration. The EU is a textbook example of a trade bloc. It's designed to reduce internal barriers and increase the success of member firms. The UK's membership gave firms one location with continent-wide access. Brexit is historically significant because it is the first time a member state reversed that integration, dismantling the strategic logic firms had built around the EU membership for decades. Historically, the UK was the first stop for US firms expanding into Europe. Shared language, common law systems, and strong institutions made it the natural entry point. Firms then used that UK base as a hub to serve the rest of Europe without building country by country. Brexit, however, challenged that entire model. Firms that had never needed to think regionally were suddenly forced to restructure from the ground up and build around ideas such as international expansion and location of economies. Brexit created a second layer of competition, not just between firms, but between locations. This is Porter's substitutes in action. Alternative EU cities became strategic substitutes for London as European hub. Dublin is English-speaking with a low corporate tax rate. Frankfurt has a deep regulatory infrastructure, and Paris even changed its tax laws to attract relocating firms. This case confirms that France, Germany, Ireland, and Italy all made moves to attract multinational employees, reshaping the competitive landscape entirely. Pre-Brexit, these firms ran a transitional strategy, centralized efficiency through a UK hub with local European presence. Brexit, however, forced a shift towards localization, building country-specific legal entities, insurance, and compliance structures in each EU market. This shift also triggered a wave of market-seeking greenfield FDI. We can note this from Goldman Sachs opening in Frankfurt or JP Morgan expanding in Dublin. These are greenfield investments, building new operations to preserve EU market access. Brexit also maps cleanly onto the Pestel framework. Politically, UK withdrawal created uncertainty over trade and labor rules. Economically, firms faced market access loss and rising costs. Social-culturally, the UK became less attractive to the international talent. Legally, EU-derived employment protections, pensions, and insurance rules all became uncertain. Tech and pharma were especially exposed given their heavy dependence on the international workers. Pestel shows how a single political event cascades across every dimension of a firm's external environment. The critical phenomenon in this case is strategic hub disruption. Brexit transformed the UK from a reliable European gateway into a source of regulatory uncertainty. Passporting rights could disappear, labor mobility could tighten, and cross-border benefit structures could become fragmented and costly. The deeper issue is that Brexit turned the UK from a source of regional integration into a source of regional fragmentation, threatening not just individual policies, but the entire operation model these firms have optimized around. The causal chain is straightforward. The UK voted to leave. That threatened cross-border commerce and labor movement. Freedom of movement restrictions increased talent risk. Legal uncertainty around pensions, insurance, and employment laws raised compliance costs. Firms began to reassess whether the UK still offered the best location economics for European operations. Each cause reinforced the other. This is why the disruption was so broad and so difficult to plan around. This case, in essence, has been a complete tour of our course. The AFI framework structures the entire response. Pestel explains the external shock. Porter's substitute explains location competition. Regional economic integration explains why the EU values to firm was so high and why losing it was so damaging. FDI explains the greenfield moves into EU cities. The international strategy matrix explains the transnational to localization shift. And VIRO explains why disrupting the UK hub undermined firms' abilities to organize and capture value from their existing capabilities. The UK hub model had real strengths: familiarity, ease of doing business, and strong institutions. But Brexit exposed the core weakness: overdependence on a single location. Applying VRIO, the intangible capabilities firms built in London were valuable, rare, and hard to imitate. But Brexit broke the fourth element: organization. Firms could no longer organize effectively to capture the value from one hub. The weakness was not choosing Britain. It was failing to diversify before a geopolitical shock hit. Brexit is a strategic shock to multinational operational models. Using the AFI framework, firms have built efficient, centralized strategies around the UK. Brexit forced a full cycle of reanalysis, reformulation, and implementation. The UK still has value, but it can no longer carry all of Europe alone. HR, immigration, and benefits are now frontline strategic issues. This is a globalization story at its core. When political integration weakens, strategy must adapt. My first recommendation is to adopt a dual-platform European strategy. Keep UK operations where Britain still adds value, but establish an EU-based entity to preserve market access and regulatory compliance. This is a greenfield FDI decision, building new EU presence rather than exiting the UK entirely. The case shows firms like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan were already doing this, which confirms it is the right strategic response. My second recommendation is to redesign the talent strategy. Firms should diversify sourcing across UK and EU markets, actively supporting immigration compliance for existing employees and building stronger retention programs. Applying VRIO, international talent in pharma, tech, and finance is valuable, rare, and hard to imitate. Losing it due to immigration uncertainty directly erodes a core competitive advantage that took years to build. The third recommendation is to audit and localize employee benefits before they break. The case shows that cross-border insurance, healthcare reciprocity, pension consolidation, and labor protections all become more complex post-Brexit. Firms should proactively redesign those systems country by country rather than waiting for disruption to force their hand. This is especially important given the labor laws. Divergence between the UK and the EU is expected to deepen over time. My fourth recommendation is to replace passive uncertainty with structured scenario planning. The case notes that many firms initially waited because too many variables were unknown, but waiting proved costly. Firms that defined trigger points and pre-planned responses were far better positioned. This aligns with the course emphasis on strategy formulation. You cannot wait for the perfect information. Define your scenarios, set your triggers, and be ready to move decisively when conditions shift. For the periodical news sharing, I'm drawing on the new financial report, Brexit in the City. The impact so far, authored by William Wright in 2021. New Financial is a respected independent capital market think tank widely cited by the Financial Times and The Economist. The report confirmed that over 440 financial service firms relocated part of their business, staff, or legal entities to the EU. This far exceeded early estimates with $900 billion in banking assets moved. Dublin was the top destination, followed by Paris, Luxembourg, Frankfurt, and Amsterdam. This directly ties us to three core course concepts. First, market-seeking greenfield FDI. Firms built new EU entities to preserve market access. Secondly, Porter's substitutions. EU cities captured business London could no longer hold. Thirdly, regional economic integration. When a country exits a trade bloc, the commercial activity tied to membership relocates inside the bloc. My perspective here is that the biggest lesson is early movers won. Firms that built EU entities before Brexit was finalized were far better positioned than those who waited. This is exactly the argument for recommendation 4. Brexit shows that political risk from regional integration disruptions move faster than most firms plan for, and proactive scenario planning is the only reliable defense. My final takeaway is that Brexit forced multinationals to rebuild their European strategy from the ground up. When regional integration weakens, the AFI framework tells us that we must reanalyze, reformulate, and implement before the old model fails. Diversify location risk through greenfield FDI, protect talent, localize benefits, and plan for multiple scenarios. The new financial data confirms this is not theoretical. It already happened at scale across the European financial industry. These are my references, and thank you for reviewing Brexit with me.